Hello once again and welcome to the Gaming News Canada show presented by GBG PLC. I'm your host, Steve McAllister. It is Tuesday, February 21st. 4 years ago today, we hit the publish button on the first edition of the Parleh newsletter. The lead story that day was news of Bill C-218 getting bipartisan support on second reading in the House of Commons. That was a significant step on the path to opening the door for legal single-event sports betting across our home and native land. Since then, we've tried to be a credible source of information on the Canadian sports betting and gaming industry through conversations with people around the industry from all sectors, and doing so through our newsletters, live audio shows on 3 different platforms, and today, the Gaming News Canada show. We want to take a trip down memory lane of what has been a fast-moving, fascinating journey since that inaugural dispatch on Substack. Amanda Brewer and Dave Briggs will join us later on the podcast. But first, we welcome back the founding partner, Chief Executive Officer of Parleh Media Group, and Publisher Emeritus of Gaming News Canada, Mark Silver. Hey, Mark, it's great to be doing this, and I'm sure when you and I created this monster 4 years ago, I'm sure we weren't even thinking about getting to 2025.
No, it's amazing to see and experience how time has just kind of flown by, Steve, and as it relates to the Gaming News Canada show, I very distinctly remember when it was time for the group of us to do something rather than just talk about what could be done. I remember that you were asked to do what you do best, which is to be the journalist, to hold the pen and to put your name out there. And that's exactly what you did. And here we are all these years later. And, you're one of the most well-known guys in the industry covering this sector. And you're still called upon by many, many partners for your insights and your read on what is happening and will happen. And I look forward to hearing what the rest of your show has in store as we learn a little more about what the future holds for the industry.
Yeah. Thanks. Listen, thanks, Mark. And yeah, this part of the episode will probably be a little bit self-serving, but you deserve a lot of credit too for bringing Parleh Media Group together. We certainly have had some success on the commercial side, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But as I've mentioned many times here, I'll always be grateful to you for getting me a chance to get back into doing journalism. And it's funny, I was on a phone call with Benji Cherniak last week, and Benji, I think it was a backhanded compliment, mentioned that I knew nothing about the industry when we had our first conversation and started to cover this industry, and it's because of people like yourself and Benji and Chris Grove and Amanda Brewer and Paul Burns, and we're going to forget some people here, but we've been able to do this, and I've been able to learn about this industry. And just quickly, Mark, I just kind of went back over Substack last week, and today, if my math is correct, this is podcast number 148, and myself and more recently Dave Briggs and Marquise has also been involved from time to time. We produced 480 newsletters over that 4-year period, which is crazy to think about that. And it's funny when we started this thing, Mark, and you kind of gave me the push to launch the Parleh, which thanks to Kevin Kennedy, we later rebranded Gaming News Canada. I really wanted this to be a lot like Sports Business Daily, and I've often told the story here about working for the NHL Players Association back in the mid-1990s when Sports Business Daily launched, and getting this 15-page facts every day at lunch hour that kind of summarized what was going on in the business of sports. And I think that's the thing I'm most proud of, is that we did create something that's unique in that there are a lot of good people covering this industry, but we were able to create something unique where we've received the feedback from leaders in this industry that they became fans of the newsletter because it was a one-stop destination for what was happening in their world.
Yeah, Steve, listen, what you've built and everyone has supported you, especially in the Gaming News Canada brand, is incredible. I'm going to challenge some of your data, just because I think you're selling yourself just a little short. So,
okay,
while this might be official podcast number 148, prior to that, we were in Clubhouse, we were on LinkedIn Audio. We didn't quite have the imagination of turning those into podcasts the way that we ended up doing. 148 episodes ago. So you're probably upwards of 400, what I would call podcasts or live audio events, whatever they're calling those these days, which again, is an absolute incredible accomplishment. I think for the people that know me really well, I'll say in business, if you give me a goal and you give me basically a timeline and you give me the flexibility to build a team, I'm all in. And as we've proven over the past 4 years, as the industry has had its ups and downs and turns, and the greater business of Parleh Media Group has also had its various ups and downs and pivots. And for those who are following us, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But still, like to this day, we have great clients, we have a great team. It's a great place to work. And what's rare, and I think for those of you who have ever had a startup business or been around an early stage company, there were 6 of us who initially started this business, and we're all still friends to this day. No one has exited the business. The investor group, which of course Benji Cherniak is one of them, is still someone that we're in touch with. Maybe not as much as we used to be when the industry was on a general collision course with the moon and it was a rocket ship. But we have a great group of people that are behind us, that are supporting us, and I think it's an amazing time for the industry. What hasn't happened, you might get into this a little bit with our chat here today, Steve, although we don't want to go too long. What hasn't happened is what a lot of people forecast would happen, which is there hasn't been this mass exodus of operators in the Ontario market. What also hasn't happened is that the rest of Canada, of course, has not opened up, not even the province of Alberta.
Right.
So just us, as I'll call us industry insiders, the fact that many of these operators still exist. Yes, some of them have kind of pivoted their business a bit. Maybe they took what was initially a gray market operation and they have become regulated in Ontario, or the other way around. Some of them have taken a regulated operation in Ontario and expanded into the gray market, really because the rest of Canada has not opened up. And why not compete in a Canadian environment where you're actually allowed to compete? So I think there are some examples we might get into today around companies that have really done amazing when I think some people counted them out pretty early.
Yeah, I mean, when you mention that, Mark, I think of Betty right off the bat, which, when it first launched here in Ontario was kind of, very, the marketing campaign, I think, was largely focused on women and customers. And we had Justin Park on the podcast, and Justin talked a lot about that, and also the makeup of the staff of Betty. Very proud of the diversity there was with that group. And, Betty put out its latest financial results either before Christmas or right after the holidays. And the metrics were really, really impressive. I think it reported 40,000 customers, and they just announced a bit of a leadership structuring recently. And Shabdar Dimitrov, who's a new CEO for Betty's gaming business, we are going to have Shabdar on an upcoming episode of the podcast. So that one sticks out to me. But I think, Mark, to your point, the biggest story is that almost from day one of Ontario opening in April 2022, there was talk on this platform and conferences and everywhere else that you and I have been over the 4 years that there would be consolidation in the marketplace. And yet here we sit in the second month of 2025, the third anniversary of Ontario just around the corner, and we have 51 operators in this market, and there hasn't been that consolidation of those operators.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to see that these various businesses, and I guess we could name a few, but I don't want to single anyone out too much. These various businesses have figured out a way to sustain themselves, to have enough cash in the bank to weather the storms, to navigate, the delay from what we've heard on some of the funds being released from, I guess it would be IGO, and they're running businesses. I mean, I'll talk about a couple. Some of their information is public because they're publicly traded. Others, right, we're not really clear on the financials, but you look at Bet99, they're still around going strong, it appears. You look at North Star Bets, and with a very interesting model from launch. And, I saw their latest, quarterly financials, and it looked pretty good. And the stock took a little bit of a bump with that. And you look at some others, and I think maybe the jury is still out a bit on them, but, and I guess I'll note before I mention another operator, the combination of the Playtech partnership with North Star is really a very interesting story for anyone who's following that. And then I'll throw Pinnacle into the mix and kind of their support of Rivalry, which is, from what I can tell, just from reading the press releases that are available to all of us, Pinnacle has really helped Rivalry sort itself out. And again, for those of us who pay attention, I think Rivalry perhaps has more of an opportunity in the Latin American market than perhaps in the Ontario market. But again, I mean, that's the nature of the business. If you look at the bigger players that are operating in Ontario, let's maybe take the OLG aside, because obviously that is a different setup, but they're all international businesses. Even the ones that are homegrown, which kind of Sports Interaction is homegrown, but they're still owned by Entain. So the message is that these few that I mentioned, kind of these Canadian-based companies that are still Canadian, congratulations to them for being in the market, because their competitors, they're well-funded, deep-pocketed foreigners who, for sure, they're invested in the country and making sure they don't give up any market share here in Ontario or in the gray market across Canada. But they're able to shift, cash flow and resources from all over the world and put that into Canada. Whereas these kind of three companies, and I might be missing a couple, Steve, so you can compliment it. These three companies I mentioned, these Canadian companies, I mean, they kind of have to figure it out on their own.
Yeah, and I think, Mark, that it's when you mentioned earlier the regulated gambling hasn't expanded to other provinces beyond the lottery and gaming corporations, and that's a little bit surprising to me given the success that OLG has had in a hugely competitive marketplace, and OLG has been quite open almost from the get-go that this marketplace kind of forced them to get their act together with their digital gaming business, and we see the success that the OLG is having, and full disclosure, I mean, OLG is a Parleh client today, but far beyond that relationship, OLG is a good story in this industry.
Yeah, so it's again one of those industries where there is this weird solution or regime is probably the better word, where the government competes against private industry. I think that's great. I think they're generally playing fair. What I'd like to do is kind of pivot a bit into the media industry, where the government, if we think about CBC, for example, is competing against private media, and they're taking money from the operators, and this is something that we're not going to talk deep about it right now. I'm sure you'll talk about it in a little while when we maybe set our sights on the Milano Cortina 2026 Winter Olympics, and you talk about what we know in the past has been a lot of Bet Rivers commercials on the CBC Olympic broadcast. But the media space, I still think, hasn't been figured out with gambling. We all know about the great partnership with FanDuel and how deeply integrated the data sharing is, and the book kind of operates inside of the app. We have no insight into how much actual handle or activity flows from the TSN product, into FanDuel. But we do know from the likes of Penn, I mean, now it's ESPN Bet, before that, obviously Barstool, that conversion from entertainment, sports media into the book, I mean, it didn't work. And that was the nature of Barstool, being kind of sold back to Portnoy, which became ESPN Bets. The other piece is the affiliate world. And as we mentioned many times in this forum, a credit to like Jordan Gannett for his vision on Playmaker Capital and selling that to Better Collective. But, as we've learned, like just this week, Jay Cassidy has now left. He was running that business post-acquisition by Better Collective. Better Collective itself has been struggling. And so you look at the beginnings of the Ontario market and how affiliates were not allowed to offer bonuses and inducements. And I think the Ontario, the rules were way ahead. They foresaw that the affiliate space, had a limited, life cycle. And now we're entering a period, and we've seen the results from Katina recently and their pullback from AI, where the affiliate world is not what it was in the past. And the question remains, and we don't have the answers yet, is how are these operators going to market when affiliate business is not very lucrative? The media business at large is facing its challenges, And so interesting time. I mean, I don't have the answers, but these are the things to look at as we go forward, as these operators, the 51, as you mentioned, Steve, continually try to not just gain customers, because let's say they have a lot of customers, but really make those customers active and reactivate them. And of course, once those customers are able to be communicated to by the books, then of course, then the inducements and the offers are all easily transmitted back to those customers without any concern of the regulator.
Hey, Mark, just for members of our audience who maybe haven't been with us since day one, I mean, Gaming News Canada is a piece of the Parleh Media Group business, our commercial side, and you have your fingers deep into that pie that Kevin Kennedy operates on our behalf. But we've seen great changes from when, and the other thing we don't talk about is that we launched this company during the COVID-19 pandemic, which brought some other challenges of their own. But we've seen a real evolution in terms of marketing and advertising and sponsorships and content, which we've done a lot of social media management. Is there something that's really stuck out to you in that evolution? And again, you being front and center or having a real good seat to watch that evolution over the past 4 years.
I think authenticity, Steve. If I had to pick on one particular characteristic of what works and what doesn't. And what I mean by that is the people who are presenting your brand as you choose an influencer or a talent or an ambassador or an athlete. I think that's what we've seen, not just in sports, but across media. I mean, people are looking for credible individuals to follow because you're using your time, you're dedicating part of your day, right? Time is finite. And if you're going to allow yourself to be entertained or follow or believe in someone, like, you have to relate to them. And we've seen some advertisement recently, and I'll speak to Betty for a moment. They're not a client of ours, so we can chat about them. And they're just taking what seem to be regular people and putting them in content because they might resonate with the audience that they're trying to target. I think a concept that we know isn't working is the likes of the Barstool model and the shock jock and the yelling at the camera. I mean, that's great. And I'm not here to diss that form of entertainment. If you like it, all the power to you. But what we've seen over time when brands, and not just betting brands, partner with an influencer or a show or a YouTube channel, for example, absolutely. In the first little while, that's a lucrative opportunity to promote your brand to a group. But those audiences are not growing at a mass scale. And so if those partnerships are going into a year or 6 months even, is the brand really getting their money's worth? I'm going to say no, because it's not new audience. And the other thing that comes into play, just based on the distribution of the kind of podcast, YouTube show space, is a lot of the followings are, especially in Canada, are localized to a specific market or a specific team. And while that may work very well today in Ontario, because we have just a few cities with professional sports teams, as you make your way across the country, you're going to need different personalities. And of course, there are very few professional sports teams that you would actually be able to place a wager on. And I think that market is just completely different in the US, where you have many national, almost independent. I know when you look at someone like Bill Simmons and you look at the Ringer Network, that is national, but he speaks to so many local markets. I just don't, outside of like Bell and Rogers, I think you've said it a few times, Steve, like 32 Thoughts is one of the top podcasts and has a good following, but like that speaks to a national audience. Right. And it's like one podcast and it's owned by Sportsnet. And so are there any major podcasts that are that have that kind of audience and scale? Yeah, I know TSN has a couple, but there's so few. Where in the US, there are so many. And you have media companies like Better Collective, like we can point back to them, and really their acquisition of Playmaker HQ, which is an American-based media company that they purchased before they bought Playmaker Capital, and the ability to bring professional athletes into podcasts. And I think that's a huge differentiator. And when you put that on Canada, you just don't have the professional athletes who are doing that. And if they are doing it, they're not really professional athletes that have a current following, or they're maybe perhaps much older professional athletes. who are, drawing on a generation which is honestly not the growth generation. It's the baby boomers or the Gen Xers.
Right. Hey, Mark, last question. When we started this thing, we were obviously heavily focused on sports betting. And I think that's because of, largely my background as a sports journalist. And, we've seen with the iGaming Ontario reports that the industry in Ontario, 85% of total wager handle is on iGaming now. And that's been consistent for pretty much the better part of two plus years in Ontario. And it feels to me like we have seen a bit of a shift in the kind of content that there is more of a online gaming focus now. And we've had Brian Christopher and Marco Bianchi from BC Ventures on the show. And Brian's talked about the success he's had as an online gaming influencer. We had Jay Sucraj from Sports Grid on the podcast not too long ago talking about Sports Grid relationships with Paige Spiranek and Paige, doing online gaming content now in addition to the golf content that she's known for. Have you kind of seen a similar shift in the type of content that's being done?
Yeah, I think if you wind the clock back, Steve, and I'm thinking more of my time like working in sports media, it's actually pretty easy to produce content, right? The league comes out with a schedule, and then everybody goes, whether you're a club or a media partner, or maybe you're a local journalist or have a blog, whatever. Like, it's pretty easy. Everything's on a schedule, except for the odd injury that might come up that obviously affects the markets or the weather if you're an outdoor venue. It just happens. And it generally happens in a very specific window, at night during the week and, during the day or at night on weekends. But those are very limited times to market to those people. Whereas casino, it's 24/7. It's always open. It doesn't matter if I have insomnia and I want to do that to fill my time, terrific. There's always something to do. And I think that's what really powers this through. The other thing, and I know a lot of people compare it to the US market, but in the US, the iGaming is just not pervasive the way that it is in Canada. It's not. There's only a handful of states, if I have my data correctly, that actually offer it, while most of the regulated legal states offer sports betting. And so it's a little strange when some of the Americans look at our data up here, but we match it back. We're a big country. We've got like 5 time zones. We have very few professional sports teams. And when you look at those sports teams, we have very few Canadians and homegrown stories outside of pretty much the NHL for people to follow. So as a Canadian, if I want to gamble, hey, I can play slots. I can play casino. I mean, I'll include poker in there if I want. There's just so much more content available. And that's why I think this market is really not driven by these sports partnerships in media, because that's not where the audience is and what they want to consume. And listen, I'm not going to get into census data and immigration, but if you layer that on, like the people that are coming to Canada, like they're not NHL or NBA or NFL or CFL fans. And if they want to gamble, isn't it much more fun to do it with the casino stuff where there is no barrier to entry on knowledge or fandom?
Yep. Great. All great points, Mark, and great stuff. Hey, Mark, before we let you go, just quickly, I want to have you on here. And, we have had some really supportive sponsors over the 4 years. I think go back to PaySafe, I think might have been our first sponsor, and XPoint after that. GBG is currently the presenting sponsor of both the newsletter and the podcast, and this is their second stint as a presenting sponsor for us. So, we have been fortunate to have some people who have kind of been in our corner. And of course, we're always looking to grow that number. But I did want to mention those people while you were here with us.
Yeah, let's not forget, Eric Levy at Osler, and
yes, absolutely
part of their gaming practice. Who, we tried to get him as an investor, as a consolation prize. We got him as a sponsor. Eric, thank you very much. You've been a great friend and supporter of us all along the way. Without the recognition from the industry that we're doing the right things, the page views and the podcast listens, they just don't have the same meaning.
Mark Silver is the guy behind creating Parleh Media Group. I mean, as Mark mentioned, it's 6 partners were involved when this thing started 4 years ago, but Mark was the guy who brought all of us to the table. And Mark still, he's the executive producer of this podcast. So, you know, he's the one that makes me sound somewhat intelligent on these forums every week. So Mark, listen, thanks for joining us. Congratulations to you on our 4th anniversary. And we'll have you back on the podcast very soon.
Thanks a lot, Steve. I look forward to the drive for 5. We'll do this again in 1 year's time.
Sounds good. Thanks, Mark. Hey, gaming news guys. Are you ready to win a bigger share of Canada's rapidly expanding gaming market? Then GBG are ready to help. As the global leaders in identity verification, GBG partner with over 60% of iGaming Ontario brands to help them onboard more players, maximize match rates, and deliver FinTrack compliance. Visit gbgplc.com today and talk to the trust experts. We welcome back to the podcast gaming industry veteran. I was going to call her old timer, but I don't want to get kicked in the knee next time I see her. Amanda Brewer, and the man behind the keyboard of the Gaming News Canada newsletter these days, Dave Briggs. Dave and Amanda, thanks so much for coming. And I didn't realize this is crazy that you two, this is the first time that you've met in somewhat person. Is that right, Amanda?
Yeah, that's true. I've known about Dave. I think we've been LinkedIn connected for a while now, but yeah, Dave was the one who just told me we went to the same J school. So yeah, it's a small world, which I love having those occurrences happen when you run into people and you realize you've got a lot in common.
And Dave, yeah, and you know, I think we all realize that the school formerly known as Ryerson University has the best journalism program. But I mean, I guess West obviously by the appearance of you two, Western's also turned out some pretty good J school people too.
It certainly has. I'm proud of it. So you know, I have made lots of friends. I still have from my time there, and lots of people who have gone there over the years, Steve, that there's a bit of a connection. So
yeah, we just want to talk about how many years ago that was.
Correct.
Yeah,
correct.
Amen to that. Hey, I want to start. First of all, I want to start and thank both of you. This is a bit of it's a self-serving 4th anniversary show for the Parleh / Gaming News Canada. And Amanda, you were one of the few people. I'm trying to remember who. When I started covering this industry in February 2021, I was talking to someone and they said, you've got to, I think it was probably Will Hill. Will said, you got to get to know Amanda Brewer, and she can really help educate you about the industry. And I was talking to Benji Cherniak on the phone, and we're recording this on Friday, but I was talking to Benji earlier this week, and Benji, I guess was a backhanded compliment, reminded me that I knew nothing about the industry when I started writing the newsletter 4 years ago. I couldn't argue with them, but and then Dave, you know, just the work that you've done with Katina Media for the better part of 3 years. And I, you know, as we do this podcast, I think about you and Jeff Zakodny and Robin McNeil, Jess Wellman, Matt Riblotowski, Mike Mazzeo, Ryan Butler, so many people that covered this industry at the beginning and really helped with the newsletter, because I like I said, I was a novice at trying to figure out this industry. And so being able to read your coverage, being able to talk to Amanda probably on an almost daily basis at the beginning helped a lot. So grateful to both of you. Hey man, I want to start with you. Like, where in February 2021, maybe you can just remind our audience what you were doing back then, because again, our first newsletter was Bill C-218 getting passed in second reading. So we weren't even at a stage yet where single event sports betting was legal in this country.
Yeah, I was still working as a consultant with the Canadian Gaming Association, and we were both trying to get single event sports wagering allowed, so getting that criminal code changed, knowing that Ontario was going to be opening up imminently. And we were trying to get the casinos open, the land-based casinos open, because we were still in the kind of heavy days of COVID in 2021. Right. So it was a lot of work across a lot of different fronts, and it was, participation with the AGCO as they were putting their standards out for consultation and trying to provide feedback. And the membership was growing as operators were starting to get ready to launch in the market. So it was actually a really, really busy, wonderfully kind of heavy time for a lot of gaming, because the joke has always been not much happens in Canada when it comes to gaming. And then all of a sudden, a lot was happening at the same time. And, I think how wonderful, because we haven't really looked back since then. It's just been, we've been off like a shot, this industry, and it's just continued to, transform so wonderfully in these last kind of 3-4 years.
And Dave, I think you were, I don't know if you were a free agent at that point, but I do believe you were about 11 months before you started working at Katina and started covering this industry.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And first of all, congratulations on 4 years, because you talked about some of the journalists that helped you, but your newsletter, the Parleh, was essential reading when I was trying to learn the industry, and it really helped me more than you can imagine learn about the greater online gambling world. I was in the horse racing world, and at the same time that you're all preparing for single event sports wagering, horse racing is fighting a bit of a battle to make sure that pari-mutuel wagering is exempted from that. There's lots of history about that we won't get into today. They were successful in that mission, and that probably held things up a little bit of getting it launched, I would imagine. But those things have been worked out, and in these 4 years, we've had 20 years worth of growth and expansion in gambling. It's incredible. I'm a Windsor kid. I go back to the first retail casino opening in Windsor back in the mid 90s under Bob Ray's NDP government. And that's an eternity ago, but as much as it has happened prior to Ontario's market opening and since it opened, it's just blows my mind how much has gone on.
Hey, Amanda, you've been around the industry for almost that same length of time, right? I mean, a couple of decades plus now, and I just wonder, when you look at where
when I was 12, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they used to throw you out of the casino all the time. When you look at where we are today, and we're less than 2 months away from the 3rd anniversary of Ontario's regulated marketplace. Like, did you ever envision that we would be at a place here where you would have 50, 51, 52, and if you include OLG, legal operators in Ontario? There would be legalized sports betting, and we see where we are today.
It's a file that I have been working on since I think Tim Hudak's Pathways to Prosperity back in like 2012, and then we had liberal governments in consecutive liberal governments, and this file went nowhere. But it's certainly something that I've been working on for a very long time. So incredible pride that the province I live in was the first to go and do this. But there was a sense that once you saw the standards that the AGCO released, and they had done an awful lot of consultation with other jurisdictions as they were drafting them, and they very smartly realized that because Ontario, like every Canadian province, is gray, which means the activity is already taking place, they understood that they couldn't launch and all of a sudden remove or ban a whole bunch of different products, because customers who were used to having access to those products would then go find them on the black market. They'd still find a way to get them. So they quite rightly decided to have as kind of full service, a range of offerings of products as you probably see anywhere in North America right now. So launching with full casino, DFS, poker, you can have novelty bets, which is something that we heard a lot about over Super Bowl because many states don't allow them. So it was full credit to AGCO that they realized that, the ship had kind of sailed. And at this point in time, it wasn't about trying to pull things back. It was about trying to make sure that, it was going to be offered, the games were going to be, tested and verifiable. So there'd be game integrity and KYC and, proof with your payments and full AML and full RG and all the rest of it. So I think knowing that we had a really large number of, at the time, gray market operators in the market, it's no surprise that, we're at, 50 plus in the market with 80 plus websites. It's just, I think we're at the saturation point now. I don't think we're going to see the numbers growing much, much more. So I think the interesting thing will be if we look, to the 5-year anniversary 2 years from now, what is that market going to be like? Because I think that will be more of a true reflection of the long-term sort of stability of what Ontario will be.
That's pretty much a perfect segue into my next question too. And I think, Amanda, going back to the days where we did those live shows on Clubhouse on Thursday afternoons, we talked about consolidation almost from day one of the Ontario market opening, and as you say, we sit here today with 51 operators, and I'll start with you, Dave, on this one. Like, how surprised are you that we haven't seen any kind of consolidation in the marketplace?
A little. I think the key is the online casino space. I think that when you allow online casinos, the margins are more favorable to the operator, and I think that allows you to still make some money. I'm not sure about profitability, but certainly you can make some money with a much smaller operation. I mean, sports betting's a difficult game, as you know. But if so it depends on what your financial goals are as an operator, but certainly the ability to make some money is possible. So did I think it would be 50 operators operating 80 plus sites? Probably not, but certainly that's the key. I think if this was sports betting only, it would be much fewer.
Yeah. Amanda?
Agreed. I would really encourage any operator coming at this point not to even bother offering sports. The casino has been sort of the market leader since the market opened. But and this is just a personal opinion. It's nothing that I have any verifiable data on, but I think there's probably a handful of operators that are underwater here and they just haven't made the move to leave. I think this is an incredibly saturated market. I think it's highly competitive. And, I was flying home from ICE and I was on a layover in Montreal, and I was talking with a game supplier, and they're a massive game supplier. They're kind of everyone's, must launch with their products, if they're going to launch casino. And, they were just saying, like, more operators coming into the market isn't necessarily a good thing, because if you think about it, it's not like we're cranking out people who are 19 years of age or older who are, casino aficionados who want to gamble on a weekly basis in this province, right? So you're still talking largely about the same number of customers with the same amount of money that's really just passing through the different operators. So if you're, a games provider, so a customer wins on your game with one operator, loses on your game with another operator, they might be trying their luck again on your game at a third operator. So it's like kind of the same amount of money that's just getting passed around, the operators. So it was, I hadn't really thought of it that way. And, more people coming in, that little piece of pie, because the pie's not getting any bigger, right? So you're just trying to squeeze market share away from whomever you can at this point in time. And I think given that, we could probably guess who the top 10 operators are in the market, it's a whole bunch of really tiny operators that are trying to squeeze market share away from other tiny operators. So I don't think that's necessarily a long-term, a successful long-term strategy to be in this market. But, let's have this conversation another year and see who's still here. But I think it's going to get incredibly tight very, very soon for some operators.
Hey, Dave, you wore a couple of different hats in your time with Katina. I think you were in charge of the Play Michigan website. I think Play Illinois, maybe even Play Pennsylvania, and of course I think first Play Ontario, then Play Canada, or the other way around. Just, is there any anecdotes or just something that shows the uniqueness from the Ontario market compared to some of those other sites that you were managing during your time at Katina?
I think there's tremendous difference between the Ontario market and some of the American ones. Again, we talked about the openness of it. That there's very few just completely wide open markets in the United States, and certainly the casino equation is a big part of it. The novelty bets, Amanda brought that up. You brought that up, Steve. Just the availability of what you can bet on here is so much more wide open in the United States. There's such a hesitancy still, even in places that are pretty open about it, like Michigan and Pennsylvania that I did cover. They're pretty big jurisdictions, and they've put some brakes on election betting is a whole nother thing that they're not willing to get into, and that's a legal thing. That's a laws impacting that. But Ontario, and then at the beginning when we launched, there was a lot of criticism in the United States about Ontario's restrictions on advertising, on Ontario's restrictions on what can be said, the free bets, all those kind of things, and there was a lot of hesitancy in the United States to adopt those kind of restrictions, and yet we've seen them come to that. We've seen a lot of, oh, hold on a minute, you can't tell people that there's free bets when they're not really free. So I think Ontario's been a leader there too. I was a little surprised about that. I thought they would, United States maybe wouldn't go that far and follow it. We're starting to see a little bit of that now. But there's, and we see from the hesitation of new states to launch either casino or either sports betting or casino, Texas, California, those big ones. They're really, they're quite a bit behind the times, which seems to not make logical sense when you think of the United States as sort of an entrepreneurial place. So I think Ontario is really, I tell people all the time, it's one of the biggest markets in the world, just because of all those things. There's everything here, and there's no cap on it.
Yep.
This is a pretty easy question. There are two parts actually. One, is Ontario a success? And secondly, why hasn't another Canadian province adopted a regulated marketplace model? Not necessarily, as we've talked about before, copy and pasting Ontario, but why don't we have expanded marketplaces in other provinces across this country?
Well, I'll take the first, then I'll go to the second. So I do think Ontario is a success. I think it's because, in large part, to the AGCO's kind of low touch. So they're outcomes based, they're risk based, they're not highly prescriptive regulations, they're reasonable, operators, when they were out for consultation. AGCO did a really good job at listening to feedback. And you talk to operators today, and there's really no grumbling about AGCO standards. And I think, again, because there's no cap on the number of operators who can come in, the tax rate has remained very stable. And the AGCO has continued to show a willingness to consult when they're looking to make any changes or adjustments too. So it's really the hallmarks that, of best in class regulators that you see there. And I think that's what keeps a lot of the operators really happy to be in the market. Now, the other province that everyone is kind of waiting to get some clear signals out of is Alberta right now, and we know that there are people from AGLC who have spent time with AGCO and IGO. We know Minister Nally's been out here a few times, and there are people that Steve, you and I both know very well, who are spending a lot of time going back and forth to Edmonton right now. And we're just waiting. We know there's some enabling legislation that's supposed to be introduced in the Alberta government in the next week or two. And once that goes in, the hope is that, some of the pieces, those initial pieces, will start to fall into place. Now, if I were a betting woman, I really can't see Alberta opening up until maybe Q1 2026. If things, really moved really far and fast, maybe the end of this year. But, we still see Alberta moving in that direction. Whether or not any other province will follow, as I've said before many times, it's a political decision. It's not the decision of the Lottery Corporation. It's not the decision if there's a regulator in that province. It's really a political decision. So we're hopeful that, with EB's government returning in British Columbia, and, maybe now is the time, we can segue into a tariff discussion, with the threat of tariffs that is being kind of hanging over all of our heads right now. Governments will probably want to look at any avenue for revenue generation. And again, every other province is gray. So this is just untaxed revenue that is leaving every other province at this point in time. So it's not the introduction of a new activity. The activity is already there. It would be more about putting the player protections around it and making sure that the tax money stays within the province. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I'll second that recommendation from you, Amanda. Dave, just on So if you didn't read the Friday newsletter, Dave interviewed Points by Canada CEO Scott Vanderwell about the tariff tiff between the U.S. and Canada right now. And Dave, I'll maybe get you to kind of summarize that conversation that you had with Scott. And then secondly, to Amanda's point, just are you surprised that we haven't seen any provinces kind of follow Ontario's lead?
Yeah, Scott, and thanks to Scott for speaking out and addressing the issue. So first of all, there's that. CEOs and operators are usually hesitant to speak on the record, and for good reason. Some of them, are concerned about market forces, etc. But the summary is essentially, while there might not be a direct impact on the online gambling world in Canada of tariffs, if there's an impact on the greater economy, that is both an impact to disposable income for possible customers. It's also creates economic uncertainty, so that can impact operator growth. Achieving financing for projects, et cetera. But it also leads to your second question, which is, does this now put this further on the back burner for other provinces? Because now they're going to have their hands full in another area. It shouldn't. And the reason I say that is because two things have come up from the tariff conversation. One is, should we do more inter-provincial trade? Should we decrease the barriers between provinces? Should we look for other sources of revenue, Canadian jobs, et cetera? And I think the gaming industry is an obvious for that, because as Amanda said, this money's lost right now. So capture that money, tax it fairly like they do in Ontario, protect your consumers, and keep that money helping the economy, because we're going to sure need it. This is an activity that's going on anyway. Amanda said that. It's true. So it's not introducing a new vice to the province. It's basically, doing a better job protecting and regulating it. So I hope the provinces will look at that as an option. But yes, they're probably going to have their hands full protecting jobs and other industries. So those are the there's some concern about the Scott's point was some concern about whether this will impact opening in other provinces, but I hope not.
Amanda, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I guess, if we're kind of putting on our kind of worst case scenario, we get hit with all kinds of tariffs and the country falls into a recession, and people's disposable incomes, as Dave said, go away. So remember I talked about that piece of pie and how it gets divided up between a whole bunch of operators. That piece of pie then shrinks, right?
Right.
So I think that would probably, kick a few of the smaller, less successful operators out of the market, because there's a minimum amount of money you have to be making in GGR on a monthly basis to remain profitable. And I think, that is a total that could be really out of reach for some operators. Whether or not this delays opening in other provinces, again, this is just lost revenue on a taxation point of view. And people sometimes, aren't aware if they're gambling with a licensed site or unlicensed site, even in Ontario. So I think that, putting the whole kind of hope or not hope of a recession aside, I hope it doesn't happen. But I think that other provinces, just with, other deficits that they're currently running that have nothing to do with Trump and his tariffs, I think that this could plug a bit of a hole. This is not a panacea. This is just taxing an activity that's already taking place and allowing provinces to recoup that revenue. So, I don't know what that would mean for British Columbia. I don't know what that would mean for Alberta. Quebec, I think, is a much longer play. And then the other provinces get really tiny because of their population bases after that. But I think, the two other ones that operators would be interested in right now would be the two on the West Coast. So we'll just have to see if governments think that this is something that they can move on fairly expediently. There's a playbook in Ontario. Regulators don't have to reinvent the wheel. This is something that, they could stand up probably within a year. It's not something you can stand up super fast, but
Right.
within a year, if you're moving, quickly enough. So it's the political will to get it done and just deal with it once and for all. Again, the ship has sailed. It sailed a long time ago. The only thing you can do is try to catch up to it. You can't pull it back.
Hey, I want to wrap up the episode, talk, kind of getting both of you look into your crystal ball down the road. Before I do that, I want to give you, man, a chance. Dave reported in the newsletter last week about the Manitoba Liquor and Lotteries Corporation, and with, I guess, a helping hand from the Canadian Lottery Coalition, they're going to court to try to block Bodog from operating or advertising in Manitoba. As Dave pointed out in the newsletter on Friday, Tom Nightingale wrote a piece in Canadian Gaming Business, and also Jack Tadman, who's the principal of GME Law and who's has clients in the gaming industry. He had a blog post about it last week as well, and I think Jack's article points out that provinces have had a little success in stopping offshore entities from operating in Canada. Does the CGA have a position on this, Amanda? Or
well, the Canadian Gaming Association has long held the view that offshore operators are not illegal operators; they are unlicensed operators, and that's where I think the differentiation is between the CLC and CGA and many of its members and many of the lawyers that are members of the CGA. So the whole notion of what's happening in Manitoba is curious because there's probably not a single province regulator, licensed operator in Ontario that would be sad to see Bodog chased out of the rest of Canada. But what they're trying to do is get a Manitoba court to kind of treat this as a test case. So to prove that there's a nexus to Canada. Now, again, I'm not a lawyer. My personal view is this may be very difficult to achieve because if there are no employees, there's no office, there's no registered business, then you're trying to go after the internet signal that's kind of beaming it into the province. So it could be a bit of a dangerous, slippery slope because provinces can't interfere in the business of other provinces, especially when it comes to gaming. Conduct and Manage is pretty clear that, provinces can only handle what happens within their boundaries. And even what makes Manitoba interesting is Quebec isn't there because Quebec doesn't interfere in other provinces because it doesn't want other provinces interfering in its business. So already, you're seeing some splintering of the members of the coalition over this. So, we'll be watching it to see what happens. If anything happens to Bodog, I don't know. Is Bodog going to comply? I have no idea. What would force Bodog to comply with an order that comes down from a court in Manitoba? I have no idea. How would they even enforce it? I have no idea. So, but I think it's more about the precedent that they're trying to establish. And in that case, it could have very serious implications for operators that are in here under international licenses, and that are accessing this with servers that are sitting outside of Canada, because provinces have decided they don't want to license and regulate the activity. So it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like what you're saying, man. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but Bodog is in a very different place than a Bet99 or North Star Gaming, which North Star Gaming came out, Dave, I think was over a year ago, and made it clear that they were going to offer
the news release.
Yeah, so they were going to offer their product across the rest of the country. So I guess what you're saying, Amanda, is that Bodog is we're talking different snack brackets here.
Well, kind of. I mean, they, from what I understand, continue to provide product and services in Ontario and have refused to come in and get a license. So that makes them a black market operator in Ontario, which is different than a gray market operator in other provinces. I think operators that are gray market operators have legal opinions that basically say that, they're allowed to do what they're doing. But again, this is why people study gaming law and they get paid the really big bucks to go and defend either side of these issues. That's not me. But I think, the CGA has been pretty clear that, what happens in other provinces when it comes to operators, beaming in from Malta or Isle of Man or those kinds of places, it's not an illegal activity. It's an unlicensed activity. And to me, there is a big difference between those two.
All right, great. Thanks for that, Amanda. Dave, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Only that we've seen some success in the United States of states sending cease and desist letters. It's still true. What Amanda says is true. Offshore entities aren't under the jurisdiction of Canada or the United States and can simply ignore that if they choose to. Yes, I presume that there are some tougher regulations and laws that they don't want to run afoul of in the United States. So many of these offshores have complied with cease and desist from the states. I'm not sure that's been tried here to any real degree that the AGCO or any of the other regulators have sent letters and said, knock it off. But Amanda's exactly right. They don't have to. There's nothing compelling them to do it, but perhaps that's just a hassle they're not worth getting into. So who knows? I mean, it's one thing.
Up to, like, is the entity publicly traded? Is the board comfortable with them being in the gray market? Some boards are, some boards aren't. Some it's a condition of, licenses in other jurisdictions. So depending on the operator, they'll have different points of view on this as well. Like, you talk to Scott Vanderwell at PointsBet. So PointsBet is not a gray market operator, and they're very vocal about that as well. But you have others who have been in other parts of Canada for probably close to 20 years.
Yep, for sure.
Hey, I want to finish, and I'll start with you, Dave, and that's just kind of looking down the road. And Dave, you're someone, as you mentioned off the top, that you've been around the horse racing industry for quite a while now, and we've written in the newsletter, and we've had people from Woodbine on the podcast over the last 3 or 4 years. Amanda's talked often about, kind of a missed opportunity in terms of seeing retail sports books and venues across the province. And I think, Amanda, we've often looked at horse racing tracks as being a natural fit there. I think looking forward, Dave, do you see the horse racing industry playing an expanded role in Ontario's legal gaming market, or how may Woodbine fit into this puzzle, or what do you see?
Certainly from Woodbine's point of view, they'd like to. I don't think they've changed that position since I last talked to them about it. They think they're another fit for retail. I don't think any of the retail sports books make a tremendous amount of money. Everybody can bet on their phone wherever they are in Ontario. So you're really providing an advanced sports betting lounge with TVs and dining service and, a bar and all those kind of things. So some people like that environment. They prefer to go out and be with people and watch games together and make their bets there. So there's probably some advantage. Horse racing in Ontario exists in 15, 16 communities, many small little areas. So it would be an opportunity, as was the expansion of slots through those racetrack facilities back in the late 90s, early 2000s. An opportunity to, give them another product that draw people in and come watch the Leafs play, come watch the Senators play, come take in the Super Bowl, make a few bets. I don't think it's going to be a game changer in terms of money, but I would love to see it. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be on the OLG's radar at the moment. And perhaps it's because why do we need it when everybody can hold a smartphone in their hand and bet wherever they are? This was when I was at Play Illinois. This came up with the DraftKings Sportsbook at Wrigley Field, which was, what is DraftKings getting out of it other than a promotion for DraftKings? And they've got their signage and logos everywhere. Tying themselves into the Cubs, I guess, is a great idea. But really, you could stand in the DraftKings Sportsbook at Wrigley Field and bet on FanDuel if you like to. There's no stopping you from doing that. So do I see that would be a good part of the future? Yes. The bigger equation is getting more horse racing product on the sports betting sites themselves. Because right now it still only exists on Bet365 and Woodbine's own proprietary, horse player interactive product. So they could use that. I think it's a natural fit to have horse racing is going on around the world, basically 24 hours a day. Intermission between the hockey game, somebody could flip over and bet a few races from France or Sweden or Australia or here. So I think it would be great for the industry. It supports a lot of jobs in Ontario, so it'd be wonderful if horse racing could somehow find a way to get more exposure that way. But they kind of caused their own problem by, saying you can't have pari-mutuel product So they have to figure all that out to get back in the game. But yeah, so that would be part of the future I'd like to see.
Hey man, I'll give the last word to you. I mean, you can obviously weigh in on the horse racing angle as well. But I don't know if we're going to be here 4 years from now, but certainly in the short
You're not
term.
going to retire, are you, Steve?
But I don't know, man. Maybe we'll see. I'll have to check with the CEO of the McAllister household first before we make that decision. But what do you see, Amanda, just as let's put the challenges aside, but what are the opportunities to grow this regulated industry in Canada?
Well, it's a lot of patience and perseverance. I think that Alberta will go. And I think in Alberta, you'll see a more comprehensive and cohesive model than you did in Ontario. I think you'll see true omni-channel experiences between the land-based casinos that will be allowed to partner with sports books from the get-go. It's still verboten here in Ontario. I think you'll also see, some of the back-end stuff that's really not that interesting to talk about might be a bit easier in Alberta too, because they've got different technologies and different processes out there. But the hope is that, you'll have some success politically getting them to understand that, again, this is not about expanding a new activity. This is just about offering proper consumer protections to an existing activity that, they have absolutely no insight in right now. So it's just the slow slog of trying to convince politicians that you've got a great test case in Ontario. You've got 3 years of data now that you can look at. The sky has not fallen. Swarms of locusts have not descended. The sort of, I was telling Paul Burns, it feels like the pearls aren't being clutched quite so tightly anymore when it comes to sports betting advertising. So I think that the temperature is now starting to come down, as we've long said, those, 649 ads, you don't even pay attention to anymore because they've been around for so long. So, now that we've had 3 years of, NFL ads, Super Bowl ads, we'll get into the hockey playoffs again. I think it's just starting to fade a little bit. The newness is coming off it. So if we can just continue to make sure that the play is healthy and responsible, that the safety net, the RG, the self-exclusion, all the rest of it is there, and that people are, participating in this, whether it be sports or online casino, in as healthy a way as possible, then we've done our job properly. So.
Hey man, Tori, just quickly to wrap up, I know people like to poo-poo economic reports, and I've certainly in my former life as a sports journalist has done some of that when it comes to those economic impact reports around sporting events or building new stadiums or whatever. But I think it's pretty hard to argue that there hasn't been significant job creation with this market in Canada. And the proof's in the pudding. Like Dave and I put together the Wednesday newsletter these days, and we advertise about 35 job postings every week. And it's a cross section of jobs in the gambling industry and also sports and sports media. But I would say that at least half a dozen jobs every Wednesday are operators in Ontario who are looking for people, whether it's engineers or compliance analysts or AML analysts, to work out of their offices in Toronto. So I don't think you can dispute the fact that this industry has some economic benefit.
Yeah, and I think it's something that when in the early days of the market opening, I mean, first and foremost, were the consumer protections, but the second thing was the economic development. We don't ever lead with tax revenue or revenue back to government in this industry. It's really about economic development, and Ontario has been such a great example of what's been possible between operators coming in, hiring, opening up offices. But I've talked before about colleges and universities now starting to adapt training programs specific to this industry, and the fact that you can have almost any background, whether it be accounting or marketing or game design or any of that, legal, whatever, and you can work in this industry. So I think it's been really wonderful just to see the growth of that here. And I know that's something that Minister Nally in Alberta has hoping will be replicated in Alberta as well. And it's a really strong argument for why this is a good industry. It's good jobs, stable jobs, they pay well, so it's, in my opinion, there's a lot of great stories, good news stories coming out of this industry. So I'm always happy to have an opportunity to talk about them.
That's Amanda Brewer and Dave Briggs. Listen, both, thanks so much for doing this. Thanks for everything you've done for this particular media platform the last 4 years. And, at the very least, let's look forward to the rest of 2025, continue these conversations, telling the stories. And again, thanks both for being on the podcast today.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of the Gaming News Canada show. Thanks again to Mark Silver, Amanda Brewer, Dave Briggs for being our guests this week. Thanks to all of our sponsors, our subscribers to what we've been doing over the last 4 years in trying to cover this industry. As always, you can find these podcasts at gamingnewscanada.ca and on the various podcast platforms. Thanks again, everybody, and we will see you very soon.